So, for those who don't know me, my name is Michelle Arnold, and I work with Travis Thurston, Office of Empowering Teaching Excellence. And this is our first seminar series for the entire year. And we're really excited today to have a presentation and just some like little housekeeping agenda items that we want to talk about. First is we have our learning circles going, and those are going great. If you're interested in a learning circle for the spring, please contact ETE through the Canvas course or anything else that you may have. We also have Flower Derby coming out next month in October for our seminar series, right? And we have all the participation we have going on in the ETE course, including for our graduate students. And we're actually introducing a new track coming this fall. So keep your eyes out for that. And with that, housekeeping's done. I'm going to pass you over to Marilyn Kutch, where she'll be presenting our presenter today.
Hi, Shelley. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And yes, this is the very first seminar we're having for this year. We want to welcome you again to the Empowering Teaching Excellence series. We're continuing our theme this year of empowering accessible and inclusive learning. We're pleased you are joining us for this timely presentation called Pandemic Productivity. Our presenter, Dr. Bonni Stachowiak, gets the privilege of speaking with exceptional educators as the host of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast. Since 2014, her podcast has provided a space to explore the art and science of being more effective at facilitating learning. Bonni is the Dean of Teaching and Learning at Vanguard University. In addition, she's also a professor of business and management. Dr. Stachowiak says teaching and learning are vital to her sense of purpose in life. Without further delay, I'd like to welcome Dr. Bonni Stachowiak.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I am happy to be here today, but also recognizing that we're in so many different places. She was mentioning that the podcast started back in 2014, and it doesn't take but a moment to think how much has changed since then. And I candidly will admit, it feels a little weird these days to talk about productivity. And so I'm going to frame a couple of things because I want to really meet you wherever you are and talk a little bit about how productivity is sounding to me, which is to say quite different than it did even when I wrote a book about it back and got published back in January of 2020. So much has happened since then, and so much has changed. I'm also going to invite you into the conversation quite a bit. So if you have anything around you, like a little sticky note, or if you have somewhere where you can even do a virtual sticky note, I'm going to be asking you to reflect on a few things as we talk through some subjects today. And I'm also going to encourage you, if you'd like to type in comments into the YouTube chat that's available to you, or questions that you have. Occasionally, they'll bring the questions up for me as I'm in the middle of presenting, because it'll be right meeting your needs when you have that question. And I'll be able to see your chat as well, and can bring in your comments to right when we're talking about certain approaches and certain topics and that kind of thing. In the introduction, it was shared that I have 3 professional roles that I play. I do have a leadership role at my institution, and I have been podcasting now for once a week, every single week, rain or shine, pandemic or not, since June of 2014. And then I also am a professor and really am a teacher at heart. I love a combination of challenging both myself as well as others to reach things that we didn't think were possible, while at the same time encouraging people, especially my students, when they need it the most. In addition to those roles, and in a moment, I'm going to ask you to think about the roles that you play in your life. But in addition to those roles, I, of course, have other roles that are less on the professional front. And that is that I have a family, so I am a spouse. I am also a mother to 2 children who are a little bit younger in this picture, but are now 6 and 8 years old. And as we think through our roles, there can be some tension sometimes, or what my colleague Andrew Stenhouse in his research calls work-life spillover. So it's not this separation. And of course, now more than ever in our lives, we definitely all have stories of work-life spillover for sure. I'd like you to think a little bit about the roles that you play in your life, and maybe you can think about 4 or 5 of them, and I'd like you to jot them down on your virtual or your analog sticky note. I'd also enjoy it, by the way, if any of you felt like sharing some of those roles in the chat. You certainly don't have to, but I'd enjoy seeing anyone who feels like typing it in there. I'll have fun seeing those come through as well. Those of you who are just joining us, we're thinking about the roles, the different roles that we play in our life. Could be some professional roles that we play, could be some personal roles, or ones that blend between the two for sure. Oh, I love dog mom. I wish we could see pictures in there. It'd be so fun to get to see a picture of your sweet dog. Administrator, teacher, citizen. Is not our being citizens ever more important than ever? At least I know for me. Soccer coach. Grad student, sister, aunt, baker, skier, laugher. Oh, I love that one. Traveler. Volunteer. Learning specialist. These are so fun to see. Thank you for taking the time to do that. I see some familiar names up there too, which is fun. So when we think about those roles, and by the way, please feel free to keep going with that. If you're just joining us now or you've thought of some and you'd like to share them, please feel free to keep going with that exercise. But as we think about those roles, I want us to think a little bit about what's been compounded since about March of this year. And that is that we are facing both individual trauma that we've experienced. You can call it grief, you can call it loss. And then we're also experiencing these things collectively. And of course, I think that I look so calm, at least to me, I look calm in this picture, but I was actually trying to be able to be calm, to create peace for myself while wearing a mask. So I was trying to envision what it was going to be like to teach in a classroom when I already get hot as it is wearing a mask and not have that feeling of claustrophobia. I was just trying to get used to it. We're actually sitting next to a swimming pool that fortunately no one else in our community was using at the time, and just trying to do some deep breathing and become more comfortable with that. But we add to that then the significant injustice and inequality going on in our country, the trauma that comes from that in our communities and in our families, in our schools. And then we just add to that just like a little spice and a little extra something, because it wasn't bad enough already. Many parts of our country literally being on fire. So there's a lot going on that needs to be taken into consideration when you start talking about productivity. Because if we ever had too high of a scorecard for ourselves, perfectionism, or any feelings around guilt of what we are or aren't able to accomplish, more than ever, we have to kind of throw that out the window completely. So I mentioned that I wrote a book. It was published back in January of 2020. A lot has changed. Although I do make mention in the book and in one of the sections, I do make mention of a trauma that we experienced in our own family, with a family member being diagnosed with memory loss. With speaking of memory loss, this is ironic, Alzheimer's. There we go. It just took a moment. And, having to deal with that, which again, is nothing like what's being experienced today, other than these kinds of things can really throw us off. Seems like too much of an understatement as I'm sharing that. So I wanted to start out today just with us thinking about that we want to recognize the context that we're in right now, recognize the season that we're in right now, the grief, the loss, the trauma, and also for those around us. And I would just start by saying we need to be pretty gentle with ourselves and we need to be gentle with others. So I'm going to be sharing some things today. And I never want to give the impression that any of this is necessarily easy. I will say that some of these systems make things easier for me because when the chaos happens, when those things happen, I have a system that can come alongside me that I trust and I know has the information I need to be able to suss out what's going to be most important to attend to spend my time, my energy, my focus at any one given period of time. So I also just want to say I can't really sit through very many meetings at my institution or have conversations with people where they don't just start thinking I have it all figured out. I must have everything perfect. I've got it all down. Anything I might mention around productivity, I'm earning 110% on all of those things. This is not a destination when you start talking about productivity, at least as far as I define it. It isn't that you get there one day and you sustain it. It's that some days you're able to bring all of you and be fully present in a moment to things that are vitally important to you. And other days you're just not. And some aspects of our life, we may actually have that pretty well together. And then this, for certain parts of what we've been experiencing, this is actually where we keep our clothes sometimes. We get in weeks at a time where just the kids know, if you'd like to know where any socks are, you're going to need to go into the laundry room. And this actually looks even better than it does because these clothes are mostly folded. But let's just say they don't always even get to the folded stage, let alone actually get put away. So before I offer some suggestions to all of us for how we might think about taking ourselves a little bit out of the chaos to the extent that we actually can, I want to share that there's a resources page for what I'm about to share, so that if you kind of want to kick back and you've got your sticky note going there or your digital note taking going there, because I'm going to have you reflecting a bit. But if you don't really want to take a lot of notes, all of the slides are there. And then all of the resources that I mentioned are there, such as books, such as articles, podcast episodes, etc., around some of the themes that I'm going to explore today. So please feel free to hop on over there and have a look. It's teachinginhighered.com/USUETE. And you're welcome to go over there now and bookmark it. I also have this link, which will show up at the end of my presentation as well. And the slide deck is over there too, as you can see on the screen. So these are the 5 things that we are going to explore around ideas for helping us be able to be present in a moment with an idea of what is an important way to be spending our time and our focus at any one given time. And we're going to start off with use your brain. We're going to get some tools. We're going to put it away like the laundry, by the way, so you know I'm not nailing all of these, and I'll talk to you about what I mean there. We're going to check it off. And last, and I think most importantly, if I said nothing else, it would be intentional, to be intentional. So these are the 5 ways that we're going to be able to be more present during this time. And again, for those of you that have just joined us, please feel free to type in the chat there. I'm able to see it. And also, please feel free to ask questions there, make comments. And yes, at least they're folded. I did have some other pictures I could have taken as well. But yes, there we go. So when I talk about using your brain, I do not mean it in an insulting way, the way this phrase is usually said. What I mean is that we actually want to use it. Like it's this incredible thing that we have that's a part of us, but we end up not using it very well because we try to use it for a function that it's actually really bad at doing. So we want to use it for what it does best and not use it for the stuff that there are other systems besides our brains do a lot better. My favorite quote from David Allen's Getting Things Done is, "Your mind is for having ideas, not holding them. And what he means here is rather than think, I'm going to remember all the grocery list, everything I need to pick up there. I'm going to remember about the soccer coaching. I'm going to remember that I have to finish that report because they need it for the board. And I've got to go do some grading because it's been, I don't even know how many days since they turned in that assignment and they need my feedback. That's the kind of stuff our brain isn't good at. And if we think it is, we're not allowing ourselves to use our brain for its greatest capacity, and that is for our imagination, for our creativity. Checklists and task managers and goal setting are much better at keeping ideas so that our brain can be freed up to have them, to create them, to imagine them, to experience that kind of freedom. So a lot of the tools I'm about to share with you have to do with this idea of taking what's in our minds, getting them out of our minds, and then getting them into systems that we trust, that can do the job of remembering these things, this very, very many things, far better than we ever could. I'm actually going to have you do a quick exercise with me, and I'll do it with you too. So we're going to spend 30 seconds and we're just going to think about what has our attention right now. It's very hard, especially in front of a computer or a phone, but I find this hard no matter what, even if I'm in person, to be present in a moment because there's a lot of gunk in there, a lot of gravel in there. So I just want you to take a quick note on your digital sticky note or on a piece of paper or even in the comments. I'd love to see this in the comments if you're open to it. We're going to spend 30 seconds. Besides what I'm saying right now, what has our attention? Besides what I'm talking about right now, what has our attention? So it could be, side note, by the way, something in the background. Like I always find it distracting that it's a 24-hour clock in here. This is my husband's office predominantly, but we do have podcasting equipment, so we tend to present in here. But that 24-hour clock is distracting to me because I can't tell time unless I start counting with my fingers. But you might be thinking groceries. Oh, she mentioned groceries. Oh my gosh, we don't have any bread in the house at all. That's what I'm thinking about. So again, either in the chat or on a little note to yourself, we're going to spend 30 seconds just dumping what has our attention right now. What has our attention? I love that Laura, I love that you're folding laundry right now. That is spectacular. And if you have any extra arms left when you're done, I'd love to have you come over and help us out. Oh, that is great. I'm thinking about a meeting that I have tomorrow. And I'm thinking about that. I just had a new gadget purchase come. So how long is that going to take me to take? Is it going to set up pretty quick, or will run into any trouble when I install stuff and connect stuff and all that good stuff? This is so fun for me to see. Thank you for sharing these things. I'm seeing for some of you sort of the tension between multiple things are in your mind and they're sort of competing with each other in terms of which one should have your attention more, perhaps once this is over, or perhaps like some of you while this is going on. So our mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. Some of you might remember, I have vivid memories of being really, really stressed when I was in college and calling my mom. The tears were there, and she would be such a wonderful listener to me. And she would always start with the listening and make sure that I knew that she cared and she was hearing me. But toward the end of our conversation, she would very gently suggest that I make a list of those things that were stressing me out. And then to kind of think about what would be one step I could take toward taking those things that were stressing me out and then having them look differently. And it was such a release for me, and it still is today, although today the systems I use are a little bit more complex than a list of a few things that are stressing me out in college. These things have only compounded, but this idea of getting it out of our head and into trusted systems is something that really has stayed with me for a very long time, and I'm so appreciative of her. So when we talk about this trusted system, we're going to need some tools. That's going to really help us be able to empty our minds, to use our minds for what they're good at, and to use tools that can help us do things better than our brains can. So we want to get some tools, and sometimes people that I work with, they get this impression that more tools will actually mean more productivity. Like if I just had the magic tool, somehow, like everybody else that seems like they have it all together, they must have 40 tools and I only have 4. And it's actually quite the opposite. I have found that getting to know a tool really, really well, you want an easy entry point. So you want a tool that's not going to confuse you when you first engage with it, but that can also grow with you over time so that you can learn more about it and begin to use even more of it to help bring you a little bit more peace and a little bit less chaos. So we're going to think about some tools. I'm going to speak about them in general terms because so many of us use different computing devices, and that wouldn't be very helpful if I only talked about one. But I will say that on that resources page that's up there that I have a link to that I'll share with you again at the end if you missed it in the beginning, it has all of my recommendations down to the specific software package or service that can help you do these things. But let's talk first in broad terms. As far as tools go, I need a way of managing tasks. And oftentimes for me, that means tasks and projects. A project, as defined by David Allen and also by me, is that anything that's going to take more than one step to do. I have lists like make a doctor's appointment, or I have things that are just not related to each other. That's just one step in order to complete it. But if you think about it, most of the work that we do in our personal or our professional lives involves more than one step to reach done. So I need some sort of a way of managing those projects, managing those tasks in a way that will make sense to me and actually make it easier for me to be able to prioritize and understand where there may be gaps. And I don't know if you ever find yourself doing this, but sometimes it's just absolutely too much. So it's really just a comfort to know what isn't going to happen because you don't have the bandwidth. And occasionally, if that involves other people, I will actually just let them know, I know we talked about this. I'm actually not going to be able to focus on that until next week. Is that going to be a hindrance to you? And 9 times out of 10, no, not at all. I'm so glad you even remembered. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to talking to you next week. So having a consolidated list, using a tool that was designed to do that is absolutely key. This is another misunderstanding that people have about these tools. They think that just because a tool can do something means that it's actually good at doing that. So if you think about in Microsoft Word, you can actually do some simple calculations in there. So you can do some subtraction. It's been a long time, but multiplication, those kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that Microsoft Word is a good spreadsheet. If you've ever really used and loved a spreadsheet, you know spreadsheets are really good at being spreadsheets. Word processors, not so much, even if they have some of those functions. So sometimes when it comes to tasks, someone will try to use a system that wasn't really built to manage tasks. And that can be a little bit more difficult instead of finding a tool that was really designed for that purpose, that keeps getting better and keeps refining sort of the simplicity at the same time of adding features. I find that it's helpful to think about the purpose of why a tool was designed. This is not to say that you can't ever build your own system. This is just to say that I have found it's kind of better for me to find a system that's already built that way and designed to perform that function. Next, we have a calendar. And of course, today, there's the choice of being able to have a calendar that is digital or having an analog. I'm actually teaching a class right now called Personal Leadership and Productivity. And so many of my students in the past have only wanted to work with paper that I'm kind of having them step it up a little bit this semester, and that I didn't give them the choice from the beginning to go analog, because I know that part of what I'm trying to do is to equip them to work in an organization. And so many times our calendars need to at least be able to talk to other people's calendars, even if our preference is to also have something on paper, because of our relationship to how we're then able to reflect on how we spend our time. So for me, a digital calendar is essential, and some sort of skills around being able to collaborate with calendars and times and having the information that I need right there in the calendar system. But yet at the same time, I also understand I have not used it, but there's a paper-based calendar you can hang on your wall that's beautifully designed and shows the entire year on it. And people like to sort of write down to see some of those big rocks that are going to go into a year and be able to know the ebb and the flow of a given year. So when we talk about calendars, we want calendars that can talk to other people's calendars, and at the same time, sometimes calendars that will talk to our minds, to our hearts, and to our hands to help us be able to see in some sort of more visual way to our liking, to think reflectively about how we're going to spend our time. And then, of course, the last tool is some sort of notes. Everything back from manila folders, a paper-based system. I find that I want less and less paper in my life, and more digital for the ways in which it's easy to search and to share information. But things that are not actionable, not tied to my calendar or tied to my tasks, or if they are, I can link back and forth between them. I can link from a calendar over to some note-taking system, link from tasks back and forth, because sometimes I need to read information in order to be able to show up to a meeting prepared for the discussions that will go on there. So I'd love to have you type into the chat if there are any sorts of advice or guidance you have for people about these three types of tools. If there's one that you just love, feel free to type that in. If there's just guidance that you have as you found better use of a task or project manager using notes, and I'm just going to give us about 30 seconds to check in with you here on the chat. It looks like some of you are already doing that, so I'll catch up with you too. I've got a few things to share about Canvas too, because I do think Canvas, they really have done a nice job in terms of incorporating the idea of a calendar checklist in their system. So I have some screenshots to share with you. I'm sure it'll be a reinforcement for some of you, and it'll be perhaps a new discovery for others. That'll be fun when we get there. And Laura, I am so with you on making checklists and how good it feels to check them off. Oh, I am right there with you. Denise has experienced what it's like to give up a paper planner for an online calendar. Yeah. Yeah, I find others do that too, but I don't want to, you don't want to rip someone's system that they've loved and trusted away from them. But my mom used, of course, paper planners for decades and decades and decades as we were growing up, and she would love to go back. She could say when I had a doctor's appointment in 1973. I mean, she really had a system that she trusted, but we eventually got her over to digital very gently. And, she's never looked back because she leads a nonprofit, and the information for them to be able to collaborate. I mean, once you're there, She eventually stopped with the paper-based calendars. Some other advice there in the chat, so check that out, and we'll move on to our next bit of advice, and that is to put it away. So we have these systems, we have these structures, we have a place where tasks go, projects. We have a place where reference material goes or notes. We have a place where time-based information goes, such as a calendar. I have some advice on other ways of thinking about putting things away. I notice that I get disorganized or cluttered when I think about things at home, when things don't have a place. But and same thing with our children. I mentioned we have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. If you don't have children or haven't been around them in a while, once you teach them, this is where the scissors go. This is where, once they have a place for things, they can build in routines and actually really do better and not have as much clutter and chaos in their own lives. But I find for me, if I start stacking papers up, I go, well, what's going on here? There's no place for this to go yet. So I try to stop myself and find a place for whatever that new item is in my life, whether it's a digital item, a physical item I can hold in my hand, or oftentimes ideas or worry or stress that I have that I don't yet have a place to put those, so that I can know that they're going to be attended to at the right time. So just as a quick example, I was actually a little bit stressed about something at work earlier. Like many of you, we're having to kind of think back and forth and vacillate pretty widely between in-person, online, Zoom. I mean, there's just having to be so many shifts that way. And of course, we're starting to talk about and think about spring 2020 as well. So there were some things that were kind of bothering me, stressing me out a little bit. And I just sat down. And it's not even my job, by the way. I'm basically making a list for other people. It's not interesting. But just it allowed me to put these thoughts that I have, put names to them, and put ideas to them. And I felt so much better after the 15 minutes it took me to do that the only exception I can have of anything better than that is to walk around for 10 or 15 minutes and come back to our work and find the ways in which we can be refreshed and re-engage with whatever it is. So those two things, getting it out of the head, having a place for it, and then also moving around, stepping away from the computer. So we also want to be able to put it away. And again, I have some suggestions here on this one. I mentioned a task list. And the thing about a task list or lists of projects is we can kind of get a little bit overexcited here and start listing off a ton of stuff that aren't really things we intend to do. They're not commitments we actually intend to keep with ourselves. They're just kind of thoughts that, wouldn't it be great if one day I did this or we did this? We want to separate out those kinds of things. Wouldn't it be great if, oh, I'd be fun. Oh, have you ever tried this? From the actual, I commit to doing this, either commit to myself or commit to others. And a great way of doing that is known as the someday maybe list. This also comes out of David Allen's work in his book, Getting Things Done. And so he has an idea, the someday maybe list. I happen to keep mine in Trello, but I'm actually thinking about moving it. And I don't move tools very often, in case you couldn't tell from earlier. So it's just that I'm getting to know this tool called Notion. And since I'm already using Notion for other things, including our podcast workflow where we collaborate with other people, I thought, why have a separate tool that I'm only using Trello for when you can actually create this same thing over in Notion? So at any rate, I love, though Trello is great, I love it for a number of reasons, and perhaps it's even resonating with you right now. I love that I can take a screenshot of whatever it is. It's in my someday maybe. Wouldn't it be great to add this app to my watch, or this one switch app, or make some tags in a mind map? I mean, you could see kind of a glimpse into the way my brain works. People think that because I am a pretty technologically savvy person, they think that like somehow I just read every article about a new tool and just instantly try it and incorporate it in. I thought, like, I literally couldn't get through a single night and do that, let alone I read pretty much every night, different blogs and articles and things like that. So I get tempted by the technology, but this is my place for it. This is how I put it away. So I can't chase after all of these things I think would be great to do because there's too much else in my life. So this is a fun way to tap into the creativity from past me that thought it would be great to look at these things and then come and pick one or two out, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, sometimes once a quarter, to kind of bring back to the surface and try things out. And you can see that there's different parts of my life. So I do enjoy playing with technology. I find that fun. My role in faculty development, I've come across great resources there all the time, things for teaching, et cetera. And then also things for the family. If you could scroll over here, you'd see places we might, take the kids or things for them. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which my someday maybe list ignites my imagination, but it doesn't clutter up my task list. So I keep these things separate. So speaking of having a place for things, what you're looking at right now is a screenshot of an email program. And I saw somebody in the chat earlier saying they're on a everlasting quest for a good email program. Email's kind of broken in the sense that it was designed during a different time. And today it can be so easy to get overwhelmed and overloaded with emails. I've had many colleagues and friends over the years incredibly stressed about the state of their email. So one colleague I remember so vividly in tears talking about how she had over 7,000 unread emails in her inbox. And it's not just that it's 7,000 unread emails, because who cares about that? But she perceived it as 7,000 ways she was letting other people down. These commitments that these expectations that people had of her, that just became this snowball effect. And to me, part of the problem is trying to use an email program for something it was never designed to do. It was never designed to help us prioritize things. It was never designed to think about, to dream, to plan, to strategize, to look at next steps. It was designed for other people to reach out to us, or granted, to reply to us. But too much of the time, it ends up being other people's demands of our time or attention versus our own intentionality of where we'd like to show up. So my suggestion, and of course, I'm not the only one suggesting this started this concept of zero inbox, which is what you're looking at right here, zero emails in my inbox. This screenshot was taken, by the way, some weeks ago. I don't have zero at this particular moment, but I do get down to zero many days and at least once a week down to zero. It doesn't mean I finished all the things. It just means that I take the things that were sent to me, I actually forward them by email to my task manager so I can look at other people's demands in context with my own dreams, my own hope, my own intentionality of what I want to be bringing during the season of my life and of my career. So having things in email that are causing us stress, because especially we play the trick where we read it, but then we just mark it as unread because we're going to get back to it. It can have a real snowball effect. It can cause a lot of stress. Some people criticize zero inbox, and I understand it because they say, it's too perfectionistic, it's not realistic. I don't think you need to spend all day, having it nice and tidy. But I do think it's helpful to think when we're going back to the same email multiple times and thinking that we're eventually going to get to it, that can really spiral out of control. And I've seen it happen so much. So my guidance is to try to use email for what it's good for, and to take email and place it in the context of other tasks and other things, other ideas, other worries in other systems that can better help you incorporate other inputs besides just email. So I'm actually going to take a quick look at the chat and see if any of you have had anything to share about email, and I can see some of you have. And feel free to type in if you have any questions there, or if you want to make comments about what I just talked about with putting it away. I talked about a someday maybe list, and I talked about email a little bit. So I'm just going to catch up with you a little bit and give you a chance to type or ask a question or make a comment. Yeah, for Laura said she's open to recommendations. So anyone else that wants to chime in here, how to deal with a mail pile, magazines, coupons, etc. Something that has helped me around that is to think about the money that I might save with coupons versus the time and energy spent trying to maintain them. Same thing with catalogs and other types of mail that comes in. There's a service, and I don't remember what it's called, but somebody might remember and be able to put it in there, but where you can actually just sign up to say, I don't want any more mail from this company, and it'll actually remove you from as a person they're going to mail their direct mail to. So trying to reduce it before it even arrives in your mailbox, in your physical mailbox, can be a helpful thing. And then the other thing, we are AAA members, the Automobile Association of America, AAA. And so I love their magazine that has in the back, it has in the region where we live, it'll have different events and things like that. And I like sort of browsing through that. But the number of times that I've actually ever attended any of those events is really close to zero. So sometimes it's just about, again, shutting it off. Do I really need to take up the time and the paper? And then now it's the clutter, so trying to get real with ourselves about what's valuable to us and being able to shut it off at the source if it turns out to not be valuable to us. Yeah, so there's a big difference between having the 18,000 in the inbox versus the unread versus the read. So that's one indicator. I did also want to mention it is possible for anyone who may not know that this is technically possible. You can take the messages that are in your inbox and just drag them into an archive folder. You could call that folder anything that you wanted to. They'd still be there for you anytime you wanted to go back to reference them, but they wouldn't be pulling from your attention. And you wouldn't be having to sort and sift through read, unread, that kind of thing. Many people find it easier once they can have that comfort where they know the messages are still there for their reference, but that it doesn't have to be cluttering up sort of that inbox, that's sort of the processing mechanism that we're asking ourselves the question, what do I need to do with this? And if I don't need to do anything with this, but I need to reference it later, I like to take it out and then just have that as sort of my intake valve and be able to place it other places. Yeah. So for the tools for task managers, Melanie is asking, so if anyone wants to suggest to her, I do have on that resources page, Melanie, information about the one that I use as well as others that faculty and academic leadership really like to use. So the one I use is called OmniFocus. It is Mac specific, but there's lots of other good ideas for you over on that resources page. So the next piece of advice I'd like to share has to do with checklists. And earlier we were sharing our love of checking off the check mark. This is going to be for you if you also like to check things off either mentally or actually literally checking them off. One of the most fascinating books I've read in the last 10 years was from Atul Gawande, who is a surgeon. He's written many wonderful books, by the way. But the one I'm speaking of specifically is called The Checklist Manifesto. Who would think that a book entirely about checklists would be riveting, but it absolutely is. Now, he's a surgeon, so he starts out the book talking about the ways in which checklists have literally saved lives in a tremendously significant way. Down to something as simple as, let's all introduce ourselves here to reduce some of the power differential that used to happen between the surgeon and the lowly people there. I'm of course being sarcastic, but like if we all introduce ourselves and we all say what our role is in today's surgery, it can reduce power differential. It can also make sure everybody knows who everyone else is. And they found that it was actually more likely then that some of the people who perceived themselves as being too low level to bring up concerns that they had would actually bring them up. Because just that act of we've all introduced ourselves and shared our role here in this surgery, then they would be more likely to share concerns they had or when they saw a mistake might have been made, etc. And then you've probably seen this. I can vividly remember you go in for surgery and they're putting a big X, like not this leg, don't do the whatever you're doing on this leg, this is the leg over here, but making sure that we know what surgery it is that's being performed and on which side of the body or which appendage. So those are the ways in which medical checklists have showed up. There's other really fascinating ones about architecture. How were they able to build a building off of a checklist for a building type that had never been built before? And side note, by the way, it was all about communication. We don't know exactly what this thing needs to look like, but we know at this stage, we're going to need to communicate about these things to see how it's going and make any adjustments as necessary. So the idea of a checklist can both literally save lives, it can save time, and I'm telling you, it can reduce stress like no one's business. So here's a little bit from a tool about checklists. He says, good checklists are precise and above all practical. I gave you some pretty big checklists in the terms of for surgery, and most of us in our roles are not performing surgery, but I suspect probably some of you are involved somehow with that. But that they actually can be practical and very useful and really don't take that much time to put together, especially when considering how much time they can save us. Someone was asking about the task manager that I use, or maybe they were asking what some of the rest of you use, but this is a look at OmniFocus. You can see over on the left, those are not all the way on the left, but the list of things there, those are a list of different roles. So we started out today talking about different roles. So I've got my teaching and higher ed podcasting role there. I do some speaking. I used to travel. Now I don't leave the house very often except to go drive through Starbucks. That's my travel now. And it's not on here because I remember in the mornings to do that. Leadership, teaching and learning, et cetera. It scrolls down a bit from there. But these are the checklists that I use for producing podcasts. There's about 20 or so tasks that need to happen for any one episode to air. Most people, when I talk to them, they assume that those 20 items, first of all, they don't realize that it's 20, but they assume that I keep all the podcasting stuff in my head. It would seem to me, if I didn't know any better, well, how hard could it be? I mean, every show has a set of show notes. Every podcast has a graphic that has a quote on it. You got to invite a guest, so there's invitations that go out. Guests get back to you, then you book them on a calendar. I mean, how hard could this be? The answer is pretty hard in the sense of, there's a lot of steps, but as soon as you're producing more than one thing at a time, as in teaching more than one class at a time, which most of you I know do, that's when it starts to compound the complexity of it. Because it doesn't all happen in a linear fashion. I just had a student who added to our 16-week semester in the 4th week. It's a long story, but so she's back on another track and everyone else is going. Things don't happen in our lives in linear ways. Checklists can help us as we're performing the same kinds of tasks, but they might be happening with multiple checklists at different times just to be able to do that. So I can see which of these people, and I'm not showing you all 20 items here, but I can see, I need to still send a thank you to this person to thank them for being on the show. I need to promote it on social media, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a look at what a checklist can look like inside of a task manager. And I just have a template. The template has those 20 or so items in it. And then I can bring it up and say, who's the guest? When does it air, that particular podcast? And put some dates to things that need to have dates on them and leave dates off for things that aren't due at any particular time. So that's a little bit of a look at checklists. We talked a little bit earlier about Canvas. Canvas has checklists, a form of checklists built into it already. And you may already know this, our students are able to see consolidated across all of their classes. This is a student view, by the way. They're able to see, oh, I've got this pre-test in one class. I've got someone's mentioning that a classroom has changed. Can you imagine today with Zoom sessions? I just had, for some reason, my Zoom link didn't work anymore, even though it was a repeating event. It should have worked the whole 16 weeks. If I had a change, it can show up right there at the proper time and day. And it was kind of nice, actually, by the way, when it happened, because it was seamless. I use Remind, the service called remind.com. So I could instantly text all of my students and let them know. But then I also had it in Canvas. I had it in a calendar. So no matter where the students went to go, hey, the Zoom link's not working, the information was right there ready for them to receive it. So this is really nice that students can have that consolidated to-do list. This is something that's fairly recent for Canvas that I love, consolidated feedback. I don't know about you, but I try to sometimes not think about how much time I've spent giving students feedback. And then the learning management system makes it too hard for the student to even know that it's there. And all of that time spent providing feedback can be wasted. And Canvas does do a nice job of that. And then they also, of course, can view their grades here as well. And then for us, this is now looking from a faculty perspective, we have our own checklist, a variation of a checklist, but grade this, grade this, grade this across all of our classes. And then I love this too, because I can see what's coming up, what assignments the students in my classes have coming up. So I have a pretty good sense of what they're going to be expected. Did I remember everything? Is there anything I need to tell them or remind them of? It's just really, really helpful. So I'd love to have you share anything as far as checklists that have been helpful to you. And I'm going to share a little bit about checklists too, but I just want to hear from you or any questions that you have about checklists as well. Go ahead and type in the chat box if you'd like. Laura is talking about a great idea to take from the surgery checklist idea, those introductions, and bring that into our classrooms as well. I'm seeing, Laura, that people really emphasizing the need to do that in breakout rooms, whereas previously we might have had students in classes being able to get to know each other more informally as they came into the classroom, as they left, now having to be more intentional, not just what's going to happen in the breakouts from a content standpoint, but also to be thinking about from a relationship standpoint and giving them those pointers of, let's introduce ourselves and share something. And I was just seeing this actually on Twitter this morning from Ken Bain, who's the author of What the Greatest College Teachers Do. He did this wonderful longitudinal study that taught us so much about great teaching. But they were talking about, students, icebreakers for students. The problem with a lot of icebreakers is they're not relevant to the context that you're placing them in, so they can feel like a waste of time. So if we can find some sort of way where they can begin to relate to one another, but especially if it ties in with what we're asking them to do, that's really a great combination. Yeah, so having difficulty with keeping up with checklists, making one and then forgetting about it. Like the screenshot that I showed you, my checklists are incorporated in with other projects and other tasks. I could see it being really easy to lose track of them if they were not. So is there a good metric for filtering what needs to be on a checklist, or is there no such thing? So a tool, Gawande, has a checklists for checklists. So there's actually a tool to see what makes a good checklist. And since he's Atul Gawande and wrote a whole book on them, it's a checklist of what makes good checklists. So yes, there is a good metric. I am not sure if it's on that resources page, but you literally just look for checklist on checklists, Atul, ATUL, and you'll find it. You'll find it there. Yeah, it's a really good resource. And I do have his book and other resources on that resources page to check out. I have a checklist that I use at the start of every academic year. I also have a checklist I use, which I have linked to on that resources page. I have a checklist that I use at the start of every semester. And then I also have at the end of every academic year. So there's things that are in a cadence of academic years. There's some that are specific to classes. The whole idea, I think back to promotion and tenure, how you have to kind of keep track of these things. And it can be really hard sometimes to miss something unless you have sort of a system for capturing those things. So I have even a checklist in there to remember to put this particular presentation I'm giving you right now on my CV as a part of, post-tenure review, that kind of thing, just having a cadence for those kinds of things. Yeah. So the last bit of advice I have around pandemic productivity isn't perhaps going to sound too much like a nice little magic sauce tool that's going to fix everything, or if you could just get yourself to that zero inbox, all of a sudden you've reached nirvana. It's about being intentional. It's about recognizing that it isn't just the tools. It's not just the checklists. It's not just producing things for producing them's sake. But it's actually about the kind of life that we want to be living and how we want to experience a sense of meaning and a sense of significance. So my last bit of advice around productivity has to do with being intentional. And the quote I'd love to read to you comes out of Christopher Emdin's book. And his book is actually predominantly for K through 12 educators who are teaching in urban areas, but it also could definitely apply to those of us in higher education as well. So what I'm about to read you is from Christopher Emdin's book. The kind of teacher you will become is directly related to the kinds of teachers you will associate with. Teaching is a profession where misery does more than just love company. It recruits it, seduces, and romances it. Avoid people who are unhappy and disgruntled about the possibilities for transforming education. They are the enemy of the spirit of the teacher. I want to go back just one slide to something that he said, because I think more than ever it might be misunderstood, perhaps by me, maybe by some of you. He isn't saying here to avoid all people who are unhappy and disgruntled. That's not where his sentence ends. His sentence ends, avoid people who are unhappy and disgruntled about the possibilities for transforming education. I brought up earlier some of the injustices that are happening in our country and some of the inequality. Some of the things need to make us angry. They need to make us angry. We also need to be better than many of us are at holding other people's anger. So he's not saying, yeah, just don't be around negative people. He's just saying, don't be around the ones who stopped trying to change this thing. It's a system. It's a system transforming education. Avoid the people that gave up. They're so unhappy and disgruntled that they can't see their own part, our collective will, and the ways in which we can transform this together if we don't give up, if we hold each other's anger. And of course, I'm putting words that Christopher didn't mention in this particular section of his book. But I did just want to point out, yeah, we can be unhappy, we can be disgruntled, but have it be to serve a greater purpose. And let's put the energy there. Let's take that anger, take that dissatisfaction, and take it towards something being better than it is right now. People who are just out to complain, just out to be negative, have just convinced that they could never change, and neither can this thing. They are the enemy of the spirit of the teacher. I have a little bit of just kind of a recap around the laundry situation. So I mentioned it's an area of difficulty for us. It really is. It still is today. It's different seasons of my husband and I. We both are working professionals, so there's just kind of different weeks where we get that together, and then there's other weeks where we just really didn't. But I wanted to show you a photo from a little while back, having to do with that situation. So this happened. This picture of our absolutely brilliantly shiny laundry room with not a lick of a sock anywhere, a mismatched sock anywhere. This happened because we all worked as a team to do this. This wasn't me. This wasn't him. This miraculously wasn't our two children. All four of us got together as a team and made this happen. So in those times when we are feeling like we just are not able to do the kinds of things we want to do, we're not able to make the kind of progress we want to make. I was just talking to a colleague the other day about her desire to seek promotion and tenure, and just thinking, can we press the reset button on 2020 on things like that? I mean, it's really, really tough. So I think it's helpful to remember that we need to rely on each other. We need to ask for help when we need it. And we need to have that mindset that none of us can do this on our own. So it's really been fun to get to share this time and kind of talk through some of these things with you. So I'm going to open it up just to the chat for a moment in terms of your thoughts around Christopher Emdin's quotes. They're the enemy of the spirit of the teacher. Anything you have to say around being intentional when it comes to our own energy, our own productivity, and where we allow ourselves to place our attention. Feel free to type in the chat anything that was coming up for you as I was sharing about those things. Daniel Goleman is famous for having done a lot of research around emotional intelligence. One of his lesser areas of research has to do with social intelligence. And Melanie just talked about that in the chat. Negativity is contagious. And I don't know Melanie's intention in writing those words, but I can tell you that it actually bears out in the research. She's not just speaking hypothetically or theoretically or trying to make a point. It actually literally is contagious, both the positivity and the negativity. So we can both shape things that way, and others can shape our experiences in the world with us as well. Yeah, so being intentional about work-life balance, to schedule relaxation, rest, family time. Yeah, what I've read about work-life balance is that it's a hard framework for a lot of people to have, because it feels too binary when it really isn't binary. So we treat it like we're either nailing it or we're not, versus I wish I could remember the analogy, but it's kind of like instead of thinking that you are balanced or you're not, you're constantly rebalancing. So if I didn't hit it this afternoon, guess what? Moments later, I have another opportunity. So it's kind of about being able to reshift almost in every moment, versus giving ourselves a scorecard of you made it or you didn't in terms of that. So yeah, I think that's helpful, just to think about the ability to reset in that way. Yeah, tasks that we want to complete should also be on checklists. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a seesaw, yeah. Laura is reminding me a little bit of, so she's talking about things that we want to complete. Something else I didn't mention has to do with the power of habits. There is some emerging research around, instead of focusing as much as we sometimes do on goals, that if you actually focused more on a habit that could get you to the goal, it will actually be more effective. So there's a lot of books that have come out, a lot of research around habits. I have a habit app called Streaks. Streaks as in how long you do something, S-T, I can't spell and think at the same time, S-T-E-A, Streaks, oh my gosh, Streaks, S-T-R-E-A-K-S, which tracks things that are similar to what Laura talks about things I kind of mostly want to do, although I'll admit to not wanting to stretch very much, but that if I stretch more days than not, I will be that much less stressed, and it's just really good to be doing that. But thinking in terms of habits is better for me oftentimes than thinking in terms of goals on things like that. Many people have talked about that with writing. I believe that book that talks about writing a journal article in, is it 15 minutes a day or 12 weeks? It's a famous one. Writing your journal article in 12, possibly 15 weeks. They talk about just, get the words out 15 minutes a day or whatever your time frame looks like. But that if the goal is too big and feels too lofty, we kind of can tell ourselves we'll never get there, so we just don't have movement on it. Versus 15 minutes a day seems very doable and something that we could actually do something with. That's Alice. I actually have, I wanted to share again that link, although I guess it was in the YouTube, but teachinginhighered.com/USUETE. So if you want to head over there, if you hadn't already, a lot of the books that I spoke about are there, as well as the different suggestions that I gave with the associated links are there too. And I'm actually going to open it up now for you to ask any questions that you have of me. And feel free to head on over to that resources page if you want to take a peek and see if it brings up any further questions for you as we close out our time here together. I am also going to have you do one more little activity on your little sticky note or digital note that you've been keeping. So one more activity before we close, and also start to encourage you to ask some questions. When we were talking about the idea of being intentional and how emotions are contagious, under the Be Intentional section of the resources page, I have what I call a Stand By Me list on Twitter. You remember that song, Stand By Me? Those are the people who really embody that song for me, that I can feel like I can be in solidarity with them as part of just this global effort to continue to get better at what we do in facilitating learning, and to be able to serve and be present for our students well. So that's a little like a social media sort of way of encouraging one another and lifting one another up. Brene Brown's episode, which is at the bottom of that part of the resources page on the right-hand side under Be Intentional, the very bottom bullet. Such a good episode about stress and anxiety and what is known as over-functioning while in stress, in response to stress, or under-functioning. I found that so helpful to give a name for me to some things I was experiencing as a person, and also people I was interacting with. It was really, really helpful thing. So lots of tools I hope you'll find will be helpful. And we did talk a little bit about Canvas and the ways in which Canvas can help us be a little bit more productive. And I gave some examples of checklists. There's also some information about SpeedGrader, which I find any investment I make in SpeedGrader kind of speeds me up. I learned some keyboard shortcuts a little while ago, just so I didn't even have to use the mouse in there. I liked that a lot. So I'm going to revisit your comments and see what questions are coming in. I've not heard of a ta-da list. I love that. How great. You're giving me some really great ideas here. So as far as a tool that I use that is thinking in terms of our tools being ecosystems, I think about that a lot too. And so mostly what that looks like for me on the Mac specifically is tools that can link to other tools. I love in OmniFocus that I can link over to a note that is referenced or I need to reference, or link over to a calendar item or a Zoom meeting or what have you. Zoom meetings, by the way, more specific to calendars, to digital calendars. But I do too like thinking about an ecosystem. I don't know of any that are all in one, everything, you know, put together, but I especially, I think a bare minimum for me, any tool that I might adopt, I need to be able to get email into it at the very least by emailing to it. So I mentioned Trello earlier. I can email suggested guests for the podcast or ideas that I have about people I'd like to invite straight into Trello without leaving email. I can email into OmniFocus without leaving email and remind myself of a task. And that email that's associated with it goes with it and is in the notes there, the notes section. I can drag an email over into my calendar. Someone was mentioning this with regard to Outlook, how you can drag an email in Outlook over to tasks. You can drag an email onto your calendar. So that idea, I just drag it from email onto my calendar app, which is called Fantastical. But just this idea of how rather than all in one app as an ecosystem, but apps that play well together is what I really think about. I use the built-in, you probably could tell that if you're a Mac user that I just use the regular Mac app. I listen to a lot of geeky podcasts about Mac, and there are some cool email apps, but they tend to kind of be buggy, and most really geeky people that I know on the Mac still use the built-in mail, not Outlook, not other things, and then just use the ecosystem idea of dragging and being able to have them integrate that way. SpeedGrader keyboard shortcuts somewhere within Canvas. I actually think, I'm going to double check before I say this, but I think that I might have it in that. I'm going to post something that is a video that I made that shows the keyboard shortcuts, but it's not exactly what I linked to. So let me just find it real quick. I'll actually, yeah, I'll put it on the private chat and then maybe she can transfer it over. Yeah, it's worth learning those keyboard shortcuts for sure. Please feel free to be typing in some more questions up there while I'm finding this thing, and then I'm looking forward to sharing some more. So the list of SpeedGrader keyboard shortcuts, the fastest place I knew to send you is a 7-minute or so video that's coming on over here shortly. And the email app that I use is just the basic one that's on the Mac. Yeah. As in mail.app. Oh, I love this question about, seeing the tools. And actually, this is a perfect segue. Seeing all these tools and methods is overwhelming. How can I get started using some of these tools without feeling like there's so much to do? That's actually the last exercise I'd like to lead you through. take out your sticky note or your digital notes or what have you, we're going to spend just a minute reflecting on if there was just one thing you were going to take away from today, one thing you were going to try. Don't even try two, literally just take one. Try to do one thing. What would that be? So I'm actually going to go through the slides just one more time, and I'm going to ask you to kind of think about them with that in mind. So we talked about using our brain. So this idea of our mind is for having ideas, not holding them. Is there something you might want to do around that? I'm going to once a day spend 5 minutes just emptying my brain into a task list. That could make a really big difference. We talked about getting some tools. And so I mentioned 3 different types of tools. I mentioned a task manager, a project manager with tasks, a calendar, or a notes system. So maybe you're one thing. You're not going to do 2. You're doing one thing. You're telling yourself, I'm going to, one thing, literally, if you think about it being just sort of a foundational base for so many other things, so much better to commit to one thing than to think about 5. So really try to hone it in there. Is it a tool you might want to try out and see if it would work well for you? Do you need to just find a place for things? Do you need to build a someday maybe list so that you have a place to put things so they don't distract you thinking that you have to try everything out right now? Could you just go and build a someday maybe list so you have a place to put those ideas without chasing everyone down when it comes across? A someday maybe list could be a huge part of helping clear those ideas out of your mind, but also, like some people talked about in the chat, things that you'd be so happy. Literally just looking at the someday maybe screenshot that I showed you earlier, it made me happy. I don't even have to do those things. Just looking at them as possibilities is fun for me. And anytime I log into that thing, I just have fun things that would be so fun to pursue, but I don't have to feel like I have to pursue all of them. So it's a very pleasurable experience. So yeah, do you need somewhere to put it away? Do you want to try making one checklist? You could go on the examples that I have on the resources page and make a checklist for the start of an academic year. Make one for the start of a semester, a term. It might be that you get some ideas to spark for next time you'll be teaching, next semester, next term. Do you need to think a little bit about the kinds of people that you're spending time with? Do you need to set up a little, one of my friends is just, we can go for walks together even if we're not together. Do you need to put some earbuds in and call a friend and say, we're both going to go for a 20-minute walk together, but not together, but still together? Is that something we need to do to be a little bit more intentional around those things? So that's our last project, our last reflective exercise for today. And I'm going to do it with you too. We'll just spend 30 seconds thinking about just one thing that you could actually take away in terms of actually do from today that might help a little bit. So I'm going to do it. We're going to do 30 seconds and write it down, and would love to see some in the chat if you're comfortable sharing. One thing. Okay, so I see in the chat, Christopher has an even better idea than going over and watching that video. You can see the shortcuts in the app by clicking on the settings icon, and there is a keyboard shortcuts menu item. Thank you, Christopher. I knew I had seen them somewhere, but it was not coming to me. That's great. So some of you have started to share in the chat box your one thing that you would like to take away from today and actually do something with. So we've got being more intentional about transcribing the lists and taking it out of our brains. The habit of reviewing a task list as part of a first of the day ritual. I like that one too. I also like for the beginning of a day ritual is to write down the 3, they call them the big 3 I find this practice very helpful. The big three biggest things I need to get done today. And I can't take on any more than 3 during good times, let alone now. But that really helps me feel focused. And then I can kind of feel a little bit like I was able to move some things forward. I don't always get to all 3, though. There's some days where it just doesn't happen. Melanie is going to try one new tool, something maybe to manage email tasks. Yeah, looking at the tools from the website. A daily task list. Jeff's going to learn even more about the capabilities of the tools that he already uses, which is so great. I have written down on mine, I'm going to schedule a walk over the phone, a walk and talk with my friend Shannon. She also happens to be someone who's super positive, and it's contagious for me. So it would be like a bonus, getting much more out of than I bargained for. What's one thing that you're going to take away? And any remaining questions too before we wrap up? Thanks to all of you for being here, because I don't take it lightly, the time that you would spend. I know we're all spending so much time in front of screens, and so I really treasure that you would invest your time this way. And I feel like we were able to come together as a community. It's really fun to be able to see things as you're typing and feel like we're actually able to engage. That's really fun. I just wish I got to see photos of dogs, but that's another thing. So yeah, I really appreciated your time. I really do. I honor you that you would carve this out to do this for yourself and to be together in community like this. You also probably saw this, but if we're not already in touch, there are ways to get in touch with me on social media or other ways that you're more comfortable with on that resources page too over on the website. So I'd love to hear from you as you start to experiment with some of these things. Yeah, the walk and talk, those things. Whew. I am convinced by the healing qualities of even just a 10-minute walk, it completely can reframe. But to add that to the intentionality of people that bring us life really can make such a difference. I'm fortunate in that I am also married to one too, so that's that's really helpful. Yeah, and my kids too. They bring me a lot of life.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. We appreciate you coming all the way here and presenting for us.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here.
Great. We have a page up on our ET website with all of Bonnie's information and the additional resources. There'll also be a link to this video as well. And don't forget everybody who came and engaged to apply for an Engaged Level ET Seminars badge when you get a chance. Last thoughts or comments before we head out?
Thanks again, everyone, for coming.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Bonnie.